RudderStack with them. So before we jump into the presentation, want to introduce who we are. I'm Gavin Johnson. I'm the Prog Marketing Lead at RudderStack. And this is Alex Dovenmuehle. Did I get that right, Alex?
Yes. You've been practicing, so
I have.
You get the points.
I have been practicing. Alex is the co-founder of Big Time Data, and he is a former data engineering lead at Mattermost and Heroku. So he has a lot of experience with building these types of data stacks, as well as the types of tools you use with them, and a lot of experience with both the DBT and Looker.
That is right.
Okay, so today, kind of what we'll go over is what are DBT and LookML, what are the basic concepts of each, what does each do best, and why DBT and LookML actually are better together. It's not like an either or situation. Before we jump into that though, let's talk about how RudderStack is related to DBT and LookML. And really, RudderStack's related to DBT and LookML right here at the data warehouse. So what we do is we provide software that basically helps you move all your data around into your data warehouse to all of your tools that need to use data, as well as from your warehouse, those tools. So event streaming, very similar to what you'd see from like Segment. We do that very well. But we store your data in your data warehouse instead of in our infrastructure, so you can use that for analysis. So that it makes it very, very usable for something like DBT or LookML, because we're already putting that data where those tools would operate. And then we also have Cloud Extract, which is a basic cloud application to data warehouse ELT, very similar to what you'd see from like Fivetran. And then our most recent functionality, the one that people are kind of really excited about, is reverse ETL functionality that we call warehouse actions. Basically lets you take any data in your warehouse. So data, a lot of times it's data that's post-modeling or that's come out of an ML processing system, and take that and then send that to the event streams of all the tools that we support too. So we do all of this, we connect all these tools, that's what we do, but we store all the data in your data warehouse. So you have access to it, which is perfect for DBT and perfect for LookML. And we're warehouse first. That's something I was kind of driving to. Our architecture is warehouse first. We don't store your data. We don't persist it. And we build your customer data lake for you in your data warehouse. So you want to apply DBT and LookML to that customer data lake, and we're the ones that can help you build it very easily.
All right. Let's get into it.
Do it.
Delicious. So DBT is a great tool. It stands for Data Build Tool. If you're looking for it on the internet, it is getdbt.com. And I'll just kind of introduce it as though you have no idea what DBT is, because I'm not sure if you do or not. But basically, it's the T in your ELT process. So basically, you get all your data into your data warehouse, and then you use DBT to transform it in a scalable way. And you can take your raw data, like Gavin was saying, the streaming data, the cloud extract data, where you're using Stitch or Fivetran or whatever, but all your raw data, and then you can transform all of that into clean and rich data. So you can, then you put your BI tool on top of it, your Looker, Tableau, whatever. Obviously, we'll be talking more about Looker in this. And the really interesting thing about DBT is how it is based on SQL, so it's very familiar, and it adds just a little bit to it to give you a way to organize all your SQL and how you're building up these models. And when you're building models on top of models, and maybe some model depends on 10 different models or whatever, stuff like that, it really lets you manage that complexity without getting totally crazy with like 1,000-line SQL files and all that kind of crazy stuff. And so that's sort of where the data lineage comes in, because by the way that DBT works, it can tell like, oh, you have this raw source table, and then it's referenced by this other model, which is referenced by this other model, up your chain, and you're able to actually see a graph of like where all that data is coming from, how it was transformed, and then and it also lets you like search through all these things. So you can kind of like, if you're a new hire and you're coming into a company who uses DBT in the right way, it makes it very easy to onboard, because you can understand how all this data joins together and where it's all used. And so I think DBT has tried to like make the quintessential role like an analytics engineer, where it's you're mostly doing analytics stuff, but also a little bit engineering because of the way that DBT is. But you know, myself is more of like on the data engineering side, you know, I can heavily use DBT as well. And so just for like, so you kind of understand some of the concepts that we'll be using here, you know, your DBT project is what it sounds like. It's your overall container for all your code and everything that DBT needs to run the commands. A source is like a raw data source. So generally it's just like a database table somewhere. And you specify like, you know, what schema is it in, what's the table name, that kind of stuff. And then you can reference that source in your models, which brings us to models. And so the models are where the real magic happens. So basically you have these sources and then you'll start building models based on those sources, but then you'll start joining all those models together, again, all in SQL, and be referencing all those models in a bunch of different places. And then because you're referencing models and it knows the lineage of where, like what source and what other models the model you're working on was created from, that's where you get this dependent acyclic graph, which can also, it's called the lineage graph in DBT parlance. But that will show you like, how did this data come to be? Like, what is this model built upon? Seeds is a special kind of source, basically. It's like, I don't know if it's just CSV, but we only ever use CSV. But basically, it's like, it's kind of those tables that you have where you basically have static data that's not really going to change. And it's not dynamic from another source. Like you just want to put in, you know, sometimes we use it for things like excludable users. Like you don't want your own, like if your company uses your own product, you don't want that to show up in the analytics. So you exclude that. And so you put this in the seed, and that's kind of what that is. Materialization is a concept that basically tells DBT, and this is going to be crazy, how to materialize that model. So you have a number of different options. Obviously, the easy one is a table, where it literally just builds up the SQL and then it'll dump all that stuff into a table. And it creates a table for you. It handles if you add new columns or remove columns and all that kind of stuff. But you can also do an incremental materialization where it's still a table, but instead of rebuilding the entire table every time, it just rebuilds part of it. And generally you use that for like event streaming data where you can say like, okay, I just want to rebuild since the last time I ran this. Like if you're running every hour, maybe you're running it every day and you want to do that kind of thing. You can also materialize as a view, which is literally just like a database view. So that means, you know, when that model gets used again, or if Looker is using that, referencing that view model, you know, the database actually has to like recalculate the results of that. I'm missing one. Ephemeral, that's the one. Ephemeral, basically all it does is, instead of making it a view or really a database object at all, it just compiles the SQL. DBT will compile the SQL at runtime and put it in a CTE or common table expression, which can be handy if you're kind of reusing things, but you don't want it to, like, you don't really want to have a view for it, and you don't want to be persisting it and like having to update it and that kind of thing. So I think that's hopefully a decent overview of all the things.
I mean, I think that covers it. It's like it's really simple in implementation. Like when you actually go in and
Yeah.
but the technology behind it and the way that they like build the graph and kind of do some of these things, like you were mentioning with the seeds, being able to exclude like full groups of users just with a CSV file, and the way they materialize, like the different options they give, is very very like technically advanced and just really good and super useful. Like talking about materializing tables, like I'm sure there's been 1,000 times, you know, 5 years ago when you would literally just write a piece of SQL that builds a table out of multiple queries,
Right.
join data together, and you'd write that table. You're doing your own materialization back in the day, and you don't have to do that anymore. You can literally leave it to DBT and make it consistent and really, really good and build on others' work and not just have everything be big looping, 1,000-line expressions like you said.
Yeah, exactly. That's the nightmare we're trying to get away from.
Exactly. So LookML is part of Looker. It's the modeling portion of Looker. Looker kind of has two parts. One part's a bit modeling, it's LookML, and the other part's literally the visualization, which business users can use. LookML is just the language that describes the dimensions, aggregations, and relationships of your data. It basically just describes your data model. It's a custom syntax. It's kind of like YAML, but not really, because I think it started with YAML. It's just a custom format, but it's relatively easy to pick up. It's nothing complex. And what LookML does well is it separates the structure of your data from the content. So, if you don't need users seeing certain fields in tables, if they don't need to be seeing, times that events were sent to the database or stuff like that, you can just hide that from them. It makes it very easy. And frequently analysts would be using DBT. Really, you don't get, I'm sure data engineers do use it to some degree as well, but it's really not a tool that does all the things data engineers need to do, which is the reason it really falls more on analysts. The basics with LookML are projects. Projects are literally any data source that you want to expose inside of LookML. You need to have a data source and then have a project for it. And you can put that project, once you have that project, it's literally just a structure, and the main thing that you have to have is a model. And in that model, you can reference the data source and tables itself to expose to users. But you need to define your fields, and it'll auto-define the fields, so it's not really a big deal. But one thing that you can do that's kind of cool is when you expose these, you can also do views, just like you were talking about with DBT. DBT can build views. You can literally just build a view, a SQL expression that can connect, data from multiple tables, or trim down data as you need, and use that as a data source in your models as well. So you can expose, tables that literally live on your data warehouse, or you can expose views that live inside of Looker itself. And then explores are what you do. Basically, you can take the table or the view that you want to expose to your users, put them in an Explorer, and then when you click, when a business user logs in, they'll have an Explore feature. They can click on it, and then they'll be able to explore that table or that view. And in your model, you also define like what's visible and not to them, as I mentioned. So they only see the fields you want them to see. It makes it very, very easy for a business user to use. Joins, as you would expect, are joins. You can join different data sources or views. And persistent derived tables is actually the one thing about LookML that's kind of interesting and also something that they advise not really using. So persistent derived tables are frankly just materializations back into your database, your data warehouse. And it's, I think they advise not to use them because they aren't really a optimized tool for doing that. And they kind of say it should be like the last option to use. So this is kind of one of those things where you see like it makes a lot of sense to use DBT to do that type of work, and then consume that data inside of Looker. And even Looker kind of has an opinion that, yeah, you should probably do that and not use us to materialize back. So interesting that they do provide that functionality, but don't really advise anybody to use it.
Yeah, that was probably one of those, like, some customer was like, hey, I really need this. And they're like, okay, we'll build it. And then it turned into a bad idea that everybody wishes they had never actually built.
Yeah.
Actually previously at Heroku, we were fairly early users of Looker, and this was before DBT times, like the Stone Ages, and there were a lot of persistent derived tables that we had to use and especially they were mostly used for things that, like they took forever to run because they were crazy queries that joined a ton of stuff together. And I mean, it was just a nightmare trying to, like, either the query is wrong or it takes forever to run, or it was just a mess, like trying to figure out what was going on with these PDTs, as we'll call them. And so we ended up, after we did migrate to DBT, it was like a project. It was like somebody needs to go pull out all these stupid persistent derived tables, put them into DBT, and let's never talk about PDTs again. So yes, I will strongly suggest not to go down that path.
Yeah, and I've read a few articles kind of on the topic of like DBT and Looker and a couple other analytics tools, like which you should use where. And more than one person has mentioned that they've had to have full projects to rip PDTs out and go into DBT. So that's not, it doesn't sound like
Yeah,
a,
it's not uncommon. Yeah. Cool. So yeah, you know, basically these two tools, they're both very useful, and they're sort of close enough to where sometimes people think they can sort of do things that they should really do in DBT and LookML and sort of vice versa. And so we just wanted to highlight like, okay, what are the differences here? And like, and then we'll kind of get into like, how should you really combine these tools to get the most out of each of them in a scalable way that also like limits complexity and is robust and all that good stuff like that. So DBT, I mean, it's literally just running SQL inside your data warehouse. So all this stuff is just in the warehouse. And then the LookML, basically Looker is just parsing your LookML and will generate, within Looker, like when the business users are using it, it just generates the SQL and runs it on your warehouse. But then also, with the PDTs, and don't do this, you can't actually persist things in the warehouse. So then, again, just getting back to the DBT materialization, views, tables, incremental, ephemeral, you've got tons of options on how you want to materialize your things. I think personally, like I generally use incremental for most things. I can use tables if the data set is a little bit smaller and the runtime doesn't really matter if, it's not going against a bunch of data. So it's a quick operation to completely refresh the table. I have started using ephemeral a little bit more for certain things where it's just like those common little bits of code that you're always like, like the example I'm thinking about is like, you've got users and then you've got a membership table, which is like a join table to organizations in your product, like a access control kind of thing. And it's like, you run that query all the time. Like that little piece of code is all the time. So it's like, just get that all into one place in your DBT and you can have like an ephemeral model.
mm-hmm. Because yeah, it wouldn't make sense to actually persist that because that you're literally just combining two pieces of data that already exist, right?
Yeah.
You need to use it, but it doesn't really make a lot of sense to persist. It doesn't take a long time to run. It's something that you just kind of want to have there when you need it, right?
Yeah, and you definitely want to make sure, like, just from even from like a data quality perspective, it's like make sure that, if you're doing an incremental build, you don't get any wonky results while it's doing that, especially depending on how your source data is coming in. We see sometimes, like product data where they'll hard delete some of these memberships. So you don't have like a flag where you could actually incrementally build that table anyway. So that kind of thing. On the LookML side, Looker will cache the results where you try to improve performance. Yeah, I wonder how much time they spent on the whole caching layer, because I'm sure like everybody, sometimes people complain about, oh, my Looker's slow. And it's like, well, that's probably because your models aren't like built right. And we'll get more into DBT and LookML together and how you can sort of get around that in a second. And again, we're back to the PDTs. If you learn it, I guess if you learn anything from this, it's going to be like, don't use PDTs. That's all anybody's going to say about it. But you know what? We're doing God's work then. So I'm okay with it.
Nice.
So then again, DBT is all SQL. So all the permissions are just data warehouse permissions. You give it a user, you can give it a role, and I mean, Snowflake and BigQuery and Redshift and all that, they have sort of sometimes different ways of handling permissions, but essentially it's like, if you can run the query when you're logged in as that person with that role, then DBT can do it too. And they do have a pretty good, they show like what permissions they need to run things, like the base set of permissions, especially if you're running BigQuery, because BigQuery does permissions a little bit weird. So that's how that goes. And then with LookML, like you said, you can, with the Looker roles and users and groups and things, you can control what data people are seeing. And that's actually been really interesting for us at Mattermost, because with our implementation, we actually let board members have their own little section, and that's like all they can see. So they can log into Looker and look at like a board view of the data, which is pretty cool, right? Like you can tell your board guy like, hey, you can just log into our Looker and you can go play around and look at stuff. So there's a lot of cool stuff you can do with the looker roles, limit people's ability to see if you're doing like financial stuff and you, for whatever reason, don't want people to see that, or, whatever. You can do all sorts of fun stuff with that. And I think that's about it on that. So getting into, when you're thinking about DBT versus LookML, you're really trying to manage complexity in a lot of ways. And it's like, which tool is best at dealing with which kinds of complexity? And so really, to me, DBT is the tool that you would use to really do those complex transformations, especially because then you're going to have your data engineers or your analytics engineers work on it, who they're going to be really close to that raw data. They're going to know that raw data. And so when they're building their DBT models, they're going to know all the nuances of how all that data needs to be combined together, massaged, filtered, transformed, all that kind of stuff. And then by sort of like, one thing that we like to do a lot is build models that are based on the raw data, but make them into models that are like very, that like hide the complexity. So the models that we build that turn into tables, like a business user could query them. And because we know not only the raw data, but also how like the business thinks about their data, you can create these models that they could have all sorts of crazy stuff going on under the covers, but really this one model is really easy to query, and like it limits the ability of people to get the wrong answer is always the thing I'm striving to do. And so that kind of goes into like the data cleansing and aggregation. It's like what the business user wants to see is not like having to query where like, you have, at Heroku, we had, billions of events going into this event table a month. And it's like, no business user is going to go through that stuff. It's ridiculous. So with DBT, you can cleanse that data, aggregate it up to the level that actually makes sense and has value. And we'll sort of get into this in a second, is like, you add LookML on top of that, have it reference those built up clean models. And then all of a sudden, all your stuff in Looker becomes a lot easier too, because you're not having to make weird concessions to deal with weird data. It's all being handled at the DBT level.
Yeah. You don't have to play around with the models in LookML anywhere near as much if you're using DBT.
Yeah, exactly. And so, with DBT, and really in general, just the way we think about it, especially like the warehouse first thing and all that stuff, it's like, you've got all this data all over the place. You've got marketing data, Stripe data, you've got Salesforce, you've got the product data, just data, right? Everywhere, all day. And it's from all different kinds of sources that don't really combine very easily. And that's where DBT really shines, is like, I can manage the complexity of joining all this data together and making something that's like, that actually can join across all these properties. And again, that, you can build all those models up, and then that gives you a simpler implementation on the Looker side.
Yeah. And if you think about it, even beyond Looker, if you are using like a reverse ETL tool, like we could be talking about like user profiles. We could be talking about like segmentation and stuff like that too. Like having a place where you could use,
Right.
one piece of analysis that's very applicable across multiple business lines or multiple groups that want to use it is really worthwhile. So, I think that's a really nice way to use DBT, especially with like the new tech that's coming out, like reverse ETL. Like it turns into a lot more than just a data cleansing tool at that point, which is what a lot of people kind of like, bucket it as, and that's not at all the case. Like it's like the modeling it can do now becomes extremely powerful.
Yeah, and in fact, with the reverse ETL tools, now that we've started to implement those for some clients, and our approach now has been basically building models that are specific to the reverse ETL tool in a way where it's like, I know that the reverse ETL tool is expecting my data format to be like exactly this, right? And so I'll use DBT to get all my data in however it needs to, and then get it into just this one table. Because not only does that it like with the DBT docs, you can see the lineage graph of how did you get to that data, but also it makes it super clean where you're like, oh, if I'm looking at this kind of model, then I know that this one's for reverse ETL or warehouse actions, however you want to do it.
Yeah, yeah, it's a very, very useful tool now with how data engineering and how it's growing. Like the way that the technology is growing and maturing, like DBT is becoming more and more important.
But it loves DBT.
They do, and they should right now. So what does LookML do best? LookML is great at like expanding data access. So if you have like a clean transform data set or table that you sent through DBT in your data warehouse that you want, once again, like you said, if you want your board members to have access to it, or if you want specific groups inside your business to have access to it that you don't want to have access to other types of data, you can give them access via these roles. And you can really expand who can see your data and who can understand it. Also for business users, just frankly, the ease of use of building looks and dashboards inside of Looker with the data that you provide them makes it super easy for people that are not, data analysts to use this tool and derive value out of it. So there's a very real valuable place for LookML. It makes data exploration super easy too. Sometimes I can tell you, in marketing, you don't 100% always know what you're looking for. Oh, we had an uptick in conversions, and we have ideas why that might happen, but being able to explore and look at, your website traffic as well as your conversion traffic and understand where that traffic came from and why that happened, it makes it easy to do that. Also, the data types in LookML are super nice for people. They have advanced data types like distance, duration, location, zip code, and they also break down like all date times super well.
Yeah.
So, if handling date times in SQL is a nasty mess, but it's ultra easy in LookML if you want to group by the hour or something like that, or join by the hour too. So it's nice for some of that stuff. And also it's good if you need to, apply a view or transform data that you want only for like kind of a specific visual or a specific data set for a specific group of people. Something that's probably, once again, as you were mentioning, like a group or somebody may want to know what you would write into an ephemeral table might be a decent thing to build into a view inside of LookML, kind of like a user versus the account or the organization that they're in, so that somebody can go look people up relatively easily. But you wouldn't, do that inside of DBT. You'd make an ephemeral table that disappears. Something that's more narrow or more like less used, I guess would be a good way to put it, is a good place for LookML to come in. But still, kind of as Alex mentioning, if you can just get rid of that complication and do it in your data warehouse with DBT, that's kind of the better approach at this point.
So, and that kind of gets us full circle to DBT and LookML better together. And at a lot of our clients, we're always trying to push Looker and obviously DBT. DBT is the kind of thing where it's like, if a client was like, no, we don't want to use DBT, I'd be like, well, we don't want to work with you. Like it's a non-starter not to use it at this point, I think. And again, that's because you can deal with so much complexity in DBT and build these scalable data models. And also, especially for our purposes as consultants, is being able to leave behind, like once we're done with the engagement with somebody, something that's really easily understood, and somebody who, they have to understand SQL and some data and stuff, but like it makes it a lot easier for them to onboard and explore like how's the data being transformed and where is it going and kind of where has it been. And then, so like in my mind, you want to reference all your sort of built up aggregated DBT models in LookML as opposed to those raw tables. And, you create all these models in DBT. Looker is just looking at like the cleanest, pristine, everything's amazing, the data's clean, all that kind of stuff. And that'll just make it'll make your analyst's life easier too, because they don't have to deal, like, it's like, here's your clean data model, go nuts. And they can do what they should be doing best, which is, supporting the ability of like these dashboards that, stakeholders are wanting, or also being able to dig into the data for more like insightful, exploration kind of things, which is what Looker is good at. And that's what you want to use it for. So, with that, we've sort of covered it, but it's like all this data access governance and data governance and Looker, who can see what, and also because of the way that you're defining your explorers and views and dashboards and things in Looker, you're limiting the mistakes that a business user can make, because we all just want things to work. I mean, even like me, who's a technical person, like I can figure a lot of things out when something is not going right, even if it's just like my computer or my phone's not working right. But it's like, I don't want to have to deal with that, right? I just want, give me my data and I want my numbers to be right, and I don't want to be able to mess it up. So that's really the benefit of Looker there. And then obviously with Looker, you can't really get better just being able to like create dashboards and, just click around and doing filtering and stuff. And like you were saying with especially the date filters and things that you can do with dates is so much easier to use than, anything else that I've seen so far.
Yeah, it is. It's super, super easy to use for that type of thing. And it makes visualization really, really easy. So, we kind of covered this in the presentation, but we might as well walk back through it. If you want to, dig into DBT, into using it and really start and try it out. The same with Looker. If you want to try it out, if you want to really start using this and leveraging it for your business to help your business do well, or if you already are, I think the first thing you really need to do is you need to build your customer data lake, and RudderStack's the best way to do that. Sending your event data as well as data from your cloud tools like Salesforce or Marketo into your data warehouse so that you can do some of these advanced transformations on them. So you can have really enriched data that you can derive real value out of, is what RudderStack excels at. We excel at bringing that data to your data warehouse and then also helping you activate it and send it to the tools that you need. So start using RudderStack's part one. Part two is, start using DBT, start trying this out and start trying to clean and transform and prep your data with it. Because I promise you, once you start trying it, and I bet you Alex can back this too, it's going to make your life a lot easier. Just being able to make things nice and set for the way the business user needs to see it, and take all of the complexity out of it for them, so they only get a focus or only need to focus on what they're best at or what they really care about or what they need to be best at, is extremely valuable. And then lastly, control your data access and let people build their visualizations in Looker. Let them go wild. After you've already built the models, you can let people kind of do whatever they need to do to find out whatever they need to find out.
That's the dream. Get on it. Just don't use persistent derived tables.
Derived table was the note of the day. All right. So at this point, I guess we can, if anybody has any questions, you can raise your hand.
Questions?
Also, I think we have a chat, so if you want to type your question in the chat rather than asking it, you can do that too.
All sorts of stuff.
So I guess, Alex, while we're waiting on anybody having questions, I guess kind of describe at Heroku, what you were using Looker for. And I guess when you were introduced to DBT, how did you get introduced to it?
It's actually funny. It was actually an engineer, a data engineer on my team, was like, "Hey, have you heard of this tool DBT?" I was like, "No." And so we started looking at it, and I told him, I was like, "Dude, this looks great. You should just totally go nuts with it." And so I gave him I think I gave him most of a month to start doing it. And after seeing what he was able to do, because back in those days we were just we just had SQL everywhere, like everybody does, right? And just being able to see the benefits of it, it was we have to go whole hog on this. And so now we've basically are just going out to all these clients to make that happen.
Yeah. So we got a question in. Questions: can you give an example of RudderStack, DBT, and Looker together with some mock RudderStack data? I don't have an example set up with mock RudderStack data, mainly because I don't have access to our DBT because I'm not an engineer, is the primary reason. Our team does use DBT to build tables. I can jump in and show you kind of what some of that data looks like in Looker if you'd like, but I don't really have an example set up. Alex, though, you've implemented this at a bunch of places. Can you give an example of kind of like one that you've set up before and what people used it for, how they used it?
Yeah. Like I said, like we use, well, I mean, at Mattermost, we're using RudderStack, DBT, and Looker. I could pull up, I'm trying to see if I can pull up I don't think they'd like me showing internal data. So that's the only
Yeah,
issue.
it's
We've
also hard
always
to
thought
show
about that.
DBT too. Like DBT is a command line tool.
Yeah, well, and I want to show if I could find it, the doc site, but I'm not finding it at the moment. But I mean, that's one thing that's been really cool. Let me see if there's a nightly one, maybe. Give me just 1 second. So as I'm trying to find like an actual example, here we go, of DBT. I'll answer this other question from Peter.
Yeah.
To what extent would you consider DBT on Snowflake as a very powerful code generator for Snowflake operations? For example, if I'm working entirely in Snowflake, is there any sort of DBT runtime companion, or is everything running directly in Snowflake? And that's actually sort of an interesting question. It's actually something I've sort of thought about, and hopefully I'm understanding your question correctly. But yeah, so by default, DBT is literally just running SQL. So it's just running SQL in Snowflake. But I have started to think about like, what's the next level after DBT? Because if you think about DBT as an abstraction over SQL, is Snowflake, oh my God, Snowflake, or can you make like an abstraction over DBT, which I think is kind of what you're getting at, is like, can you do stuff where, like the way I'm thinking about it is like, what if instead of DBT is basically generating SQL, but what if you had something on top of DBT that generated DBT stuff? Now you start cooking. But anyway, that'll be for another session because that stuff gets a little bonkers. Do you care if I share my screen? I don't even know if I
Yeah,
can share my screen.
let me stop sharing mine, and then I think you can share yours. Give it a try.
No, I gotta find there's this one,
I'll see if I can just let you share the screen.
yeah. Oh man, I'm trying to find where this, oh, here we go. No, man, I'm gonna be so sad about myself if I can't find this. Where does that go? Config details. So what I can show you at least is, oh yeah, here it is. Here's the boy. All right, let me share here in a second. Oh God, is my Zoom blown up? Here we go. All right. Well, actually, before we just blow your mind away with this thing, this is the DBT Docs website. So this gets automatically generated based on your DBT code. And so what's really cool about this, as you can see, is it's showing you all this, what the columns, data types, it's giving you an approximate size, like all this stuff that you might be interested in knowing. And again, like if I'm coming in as a new analyst, it's like, oh, wow, this table has 34 million rows. Like that's a pretty good amount. You can also you can just click here like, oh, what is this referenced by? So this is referenced by this thing, but look at what it depends on. And then you can also see the code directly in it as well.
So we should mention this is the hosted DBT like cloud interface. DBT is also an open source command line tool as well that you can basically run all this stuff, but see all the nice stuff that Alex is showing you. Like you don't get much of that with it.
Yeah, and so this is what I was talking about with the lineage graph. And I mean, I'm showing you guys like the most ridiculous model that we have, partially because just the data that Mattermost has is just bananas. But you can, what's really cool about this is you can click these different things and it'll show you how the data is flowing. And then you can see like, how is this like getting all joined together? And I can just explore, and now I know, how does this all get built up, and like where does this model live. And one thing I will also note is this is not, nobody wrote like, thousands of lines of code to join all this and union it together. This is all using DBT macros, which is something we didn't really cover too much, but DBT macros you can actually like run queries on your database that then you can use the results of those queries to then generate more queries, if you will. So basically what this is doing is like querying a database schema for all the tables in it that match like a certain pattern, basically. I don't think we're using regular expressions, but you could. And it generates all this union stuff, and that's how we get, and the whole point of this, right, is to reduce complexity. So this is this crazy data model that you have to take from, I mean, what is this, 100 tables, 50 tables? And then you're going to get that down to one table that's actually consumable in Looker. And so that's, that's the real power.
And like that's what DBT alone does. So like the power of DBT, you can go with the command line tool. That visualization though is super cool, because if you think about it, like if you work on one of, especially like the origin nodes of that, you want to know what that could possibly impact, so you can see for errors in the downstream actual like results of using that model. So that's good. It also makes it super easy to like see like, hey, we have something going weird in this table. You can literally just go and see where it came from. It makes it super easy to figure out like where problems are and identify them and fix them, right? And if you do mess something up, it's all version controlled, I believe, too. So it makes it all easy to roll back too.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and also like you can, like, let's say you totally mess something up and you need to rebuild like a whole set of those tables. You can use their syntax and do, they call it a full refresh. Mm-hmm. And even if any of your tables are incremental, it'll instead completely rebuild them from the ground up. So that's pretty useful, where you're not having to think about like, oh crap, I got to rebuild this table from like, a month ago to now, or whatever the time range is that I messed up. Like you can just completely rebuild it. Let's just do it, start over. A couple of comments I saw in the chat. That is correct. So the DBT CLI will generate the docs locally, and you can, it'll run like a little server locally too. But obviously the nice thing about the DBT cloud is, well, you don't have to host it anywhere. Yeah, and that's nice. And it all automatically gets generated. And then you also have like, your regular access control, things like that. And also, yeah, I mean, somebody mentioned SQL plus Jinja. And I mean, that's really, DBT is basically just SQL and Jinja together, and a templating language for those who are unaware. And because of that, that's where you really get the power of, like I was kind of saying earlier with these macros, you can do some really cool stuff that let you like loop over data sets and create like, it's basically like you're generating even more kinds of queries, and you can generate even more kind of complex stuff without the code being, so it's like the output of it is kind of crazy. Like the underlying SQL will be kind of crazy, but the output and like the tables that get generated aren't. And again, that's the whole point of DBT. How do I take this complex data set that I have and get it to somewhere that's easy to use? And then again, in your LookML, you have something that's really easy to use on that side that doesn't have a bunch of, craziness that you would have to otherwise do.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I'll drop these in the chat if anybody wants to look more at Snowflake and DBT together. So the cool thing about Mattermost is it's all open source. And so we've open sourced all of our DBT code and our Looker code. And I mean, this is what is Mattermost, is a Series C company or something, like, fairly large company, right? Like we have a lot of data. Like this is what it really looks like to, here's where your DBT models and your Looker models are going to look like, that really pulls all this stuff together. So if you guys want to go check that out, and I mean, again, like it's all open source, just, if you guys want to use it, go nuts.
I think the only thing we kind of missed in the chain was like, was RudderStack, and that's because RudderStack is so simple. It's literally like using to event stream in RudderStack. It's literally like using Google Analytics. You put a JavaScript snippet on your site, or if you're using Gatsby or another platform, we have a lot of plugins for those, and it will send event data to RudderStack. It's super simple to use, and then once it's sent to RudderStack, you can send it to your warehouse and whatever other tools you want. You can send it to Google Analytics. You can send it to GA4, so you can run both side by side. And you can send it to a ton of other tools. I think we have like 100 integrations or something at this point. I can't remember the exact number. But yeah, it's very useful. It's super easy to set up. And then you can just, literally set up a warehouse as a destination and your data will go there. And then you can start building on it. Like I could go through and show you guys how to hook it up, but it's really not super exciting. And frankly, that's great. That's what you want a data pipeline to be. You want it to be go in, make it super easy to do it, and then never have to look at it again. And that's what
Actually, I'll bring up my my Mattermost experience because I think it's a pretty good story. So when I joined Mattermost, they were using Segment, and because of the pricing model, and it's an open source product, so there's a lot of people that use Mattermost just on their own servers and stuff, and we get telemetry from those. So I mean, you're talking about thousands and thousands of servers daily that are sending events and that kind of stuff. So before I had joined, they had limited how much data they were sending, like how many events they were tracking, because they didn't want their segment bill to be, crazy high, right? And then I was like, dude, we need to get off segment. And that's when RudderStack came in, and it's been really, really easy to, it was so easy to migrate Mattermost over from segment to RudderStack. I mean, like it really didn't take barely any engineering time. And then we were able to turn back on all that telemetry, and then we were able to implement it on, docs.mattermost.com, www.mattermost.com, just like all the web properties and all this stuff. And by doing that, you get all this data in. And again, with DBT, you can then start joining it all together. Like, how did this person who, visited the website last week, did they go to the Docs website and what did they do there? And then how do they use the product once they actually got into it? And what's their journey and all that kind of stuff? So it's been, I mean, obviously I'm a RudderStack fan, so.
Yeah, it's a super useful product. And a lot of our customers were prior segment users, a whole lot. Because we do what they do really, really well, and we do a few things more than they do, and our pricing model is much nicer. So yeah.
Yeah, agreed, for sure.
So I guess, are there any more questions? We'll give you guys another minute or so, and then if there aren't, we'll close out this webinar.
Sounds good.
So you've mentioned big time data. I guess it might be worthwhile for you to mention kind of what you guys do. You've kind of alluded to it a few times, but you haven't explicitly kind of said it. So what do you guys do with big time data?
Yeah, so I think the main thing is really being able to helping companies actually leverage their data that they have, and helping them also collect more data if they need to. But it's what we noticed was every company that we would go to, they had all this data all over the place. Like I was saying earlier, Marketo, Stripe, Salesforce, blah, 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 the product data, the event streaming data, the web data, all this stuff. And they could do some slight analytics, but mostly it was oh, I'm going to go try to figure out what's going on in Stripe, and just this little tiny piece. And so what we do is, let's get all your data into a data warehouse, go for that data warehouse first approach. We're going to use DBT to transform that data, like we've been talking about here, into something that's actually useful. And then we'll put Looker or another BI tool on top of it that'll actually let you get to, so that stakeholders can actually view, understand, and actually have impact on your business, right? The whole point of it is, how can I actually make actionable decisions based on this data, and then see, after I've made that decision, the uplift or whatever that you're looking for in the data as well. And then the next part of it is, with the reverse ETL warehouse actions thing, is let's go enrich some of these other tools. And I'll use the example of Salesforce. It's you've got all these salespeople who are in Salesforce all day. They don't want to go clicking around to 100 different things. Just give them, a little summarized data about the customer that they're talking to so that they can have an intelligent conversation, when they have a call with that client. And so basically you transform the data with DBT, you can use, RudderStack Warehouse Actions, reverse ETL, and then get that data into Salesforce. And that the data is clean because you vetted all your data models through DBT. And so it makes it so that people aren't having, oh, I saw this number in this tool and I saw that number in that tool. And then what really ends up happening is nobody trusts the data except the data that's in their tool. Yeah. So the salespeople are just like, I don't care about that. I just look at Salesforce. You know what I mean? So that's the kind of thing that we.
You know what else it helps with too? Actually, you mentioned like pushing back into Salesforce, but frankly, if you think about a lot of the times now when like a marketing ops team or let's say a demand generation person in marketing, or frankly, let's go back to a product manager. Doesn't matter if anybody from any of these different groups across your company wants data. A lot of times they'll send an email to an analyst, right? Like, hey, could you send me a spreadsheet? Could you send me a Google Sheet? Like, could you just send me a dump of the data so I can use it, so I can do segmentation or something else, right? And then they go and they put it in a CSV and then they upload in whatever tool they want to use it in. And it works, but you get updates whenever people get around to it, like once a week, once a month, and you have multiple people in a chain doing transformations to data. So if something goes wrong, you don't know who broke it or where, right? Putting DBT in to do the transformations and then something like Warehouse Actions, RudderStack Warehouse Actions in to actually do the reverse ETL and push it in and do it on a continual basis instead of just doing it, once a week and doing it automatically instead of having people handling it is just it's a more streamlined approach. You should not have spreadsheets and emails in your freaking data pipelines. Your data pipeline should be coded and automated, and that's what we do well. So yeah, that's interesting that's how people are using it, and it makes sense, and I'm super glad that we were able to make that and that you guys are using it at your clients now.
Oh yeah, man, it's all the rage these days.
It is. Reverse ETL so hard. Anyway, let's close out the webinar. It was good talking today, Alex. It was good, everybody. Thank you guys for attending, and we'll talk to you all soon. Have a good day.
All right. See ya.